The evening crowd had just begun to fill the small restaurant when the quiet waitress moved from table to table with her usual calm steps. She carried plates with steady hands, kept her voice soft, and always offered a gentle smile. Most people didn't notice her much. She blended into the background like part of the furniture, doing her work without drawing attention. That was how she preferred it. Life felt easier when eyes weren't on her. The restaurant wasn't fancy. It was a warm, homely place where families came after long work days and older couples sat for hours sipping tea. In the corner stood a dusty old piano that had not been played in years. Some guests liked to joke about it, saying it looked like a museum piece. The waitress walked past that piano every day, carefully avoiding even brushing against it. She could feel something shift inside her whenever she came close. But she never let that feeling show. Some customers made light jokes about her quiet nature. They said she looked like someone who never talked, someone who probably didn't know any hobby except serving food. She didn't take their words to heart. In her mind, people said such things because they didn't know her story, and she wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. That evening started like every other. She tied her apron, checked the tables, and stepped into her usual rhythm. She had learned long ago that moving with purpose helped her keep her thoughts quiet. While she worked, she tried not to think about the past, not to think about music, and especially not to think about the piano sitting so close. The door chimed again as a group of cheerful customers walked in. They were celebrating something, perhaps a birthday or a promotion. Their laughter filled the restaurant, mixing with the clatter of dishes and the smell of freshly cooked food. The waitress welcomed them with a nod and quickly brought menus to their table dot as she walked away. She heard one of them say, "Hey, does anyone even use that piano? It looks like it came from an old movie." Another voice replied, "Probably nobody here knows how to play it, especially not her." They weren't being cruel, just careless. But their words still pressed against her heart. She kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard anything. She had learned to hide her reactions well. Years of practice had taught her that the best way to deal with such comments was to let them fade on their own. But even as she worked, she felt the old familiar ache beneath the surface. Music had once been her world. Long before life pushed her into long hours and worn-out shoes, she had spent her days behind a piano. But that part of her life was gone now, or at least she believed it was. The memories were beautiful, but they carried a sharp edge. Thinking about them hurt, so she locked them away. The group in the corner grew louder, clearly enjoying their time. Their happiness wasn't a problem. It just made the air feel heavier for her. One of them suddenly shouted across the restaurant, "Hey, can someone play something for us? It's a celebration. Lighten the mood." The restaurant owner came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He was a kind man, though sometimes he spoke without thinking. He glanced at the piano and then at the waitress, who had just stepped out with a tray of drinks. "You can play something simple, right?" he said casually, almost like asking her to pass him a spoon. "Just a short piece." "They're celebrating." She froze for a moment. Her fingers clutched the tray a bit too tightly. I don't really." Before she could finish, one of the customers called out, "Yeah, let her try. It'll be fun." A few chuckles followed. Not aggressive, not hateful, just careless again. But their laughter echoed in her ears like a challenge she never wanted. The owner, still not realizing the weight of his request, nodded toward the piano. "Just try something simple. They'll enjoy it." She placed the tray down slowly, her heartbeat rising in her chest. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to sit in front of that piano. She didn't want to open the door she had kept closed for so many years, but she also didn't want to make a scene. And so, with hesitant steps, she walked toward the piano. The room quieted just enough for her to feel every stare. She could sense the uncertainty in the air. Some people expected her to fail. Others seemed amused by the situation. Only a few looked genuinely curious. She sat down on the old wooden bench. The piano keys were worn and slightly yellowed. Her hands trembled as she rested them gently above the keys. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since life forced her to choose survival over passion. The weight of the moment felt overwhelming, that someone at the back whispered, "This should be interesting." Another replied, "She probably doesn't even know what she's doing." She heard everything. But strangely, instead of feeling embarrassed, she felt something else, a quiet determination. A small flame inside her flickered to life, something she thought had disappeared long ago. She took a slow breath. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. She didn't know what she would play. She hadn't practiced in years. But her hands remembered things her mind had forgotten. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the memories wash over her. The long nights practicing, the soft guidance of an old teacher, the feeling of losing herself in music. The chatter faded. The noise of plates seemed distant now. Even the lights felt softer, somehow. She opened her eyes and gently pressed the first note. It was soft and shaky. A few people exchanged glances, but she didn't stop. She pressed another key, and another. A familiar tune began to form, slow at first. Her fingers moved cautiously, like someone walking through an old home they had once loved. The piano was out of tune in some places, but that didn't matter. She played anyway. The room grew still. The laughter, the teasing, the chatter, everything softened as the melody began to grow steadier. Her hands found their confidence again, shaping the music with care and quiet emotion. Customers leaned in their seats, surprised by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The owner stood near the counter, slowly realizing he had asked something much bigger of her than he understood. She let the music guide her. The notes carried both warmth and sadness. They carried years of silence, years of lost dreams, years of quiet strength she had built to keep going. Every sound she created seemed to fill the room with a story no one knew yet. For a moment, she wasn't the quiet waitress who blended into the background. She wasn't the woman people overlooked. She wasn't the person who kept her head down and hid her past. She was someone who belonged to music, and as she continued to play, the people who came in expecting dinner and laughter were now watching her with a completely different expression. The jokes had stopped. The teasing smiles had faded. What replaced them was a stillness, a sense of wonder. She didn't know if the piece would come out perfectly. She didn't know if she remembered every part of the melody. But something inside her had awakened, as she let it flow freely. Her hands grew steadier. The music deepened. The room listened. And without planning it, without wanting it, she had taken the first step into a part of her life she thought she had lost forever. By the time she reached the final soft chord, the room felt different, almost sacred. She didn't yet look up. She didn't want to see their reactions. She just rested her hands on her lap for a moment and breathed, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She had played again. After all these years, she had touched the piano not because she wanted to, but because she was pushed into it. Yet now, she wasn't sure whether she regretted it. She slowly lifted her gaze, unsure of what she would see next. The room stayed silent longer than she expected. She could feel the stillness hanging in the air, as if the whole restaurant had forgotten how to breathe. For a moment, she wondered if the customers were shocked or confused or simply unsure of how to respond. She kept her hands gently folded in her lap, trying hard not to look too nervous, even though her heart was beating fast. When she finally looked up, she saw something she never imagined. People were staring at her, not with the teasing smiles from earlier, but with quiet amazement. A few had soft expressions, as if they were trying to understand what had just happened. The group celebrating near the back sat frozen, no longer joking or laughing. Even they seemed moved. She felt the heat rise in her face. She wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Not in a way that exposed a part of her she had hidden for so long. She slowly stood from the piano bench, unsure whether to return to her work or wait for someone to say something. The owner stepped forward first. He looked surprised, almost emotional, as if he had watched something he couldn't explain. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said softly. She gave a small, awkward smile. "It's been a long time," she whispered. The celebrating group finally came back to life. One of them clapped hesitantly, then another, and then the whole table joined in. The sound grew until the entire restaurant was applauding. She didn't know where to look. She stared at the floor, shy and overwhelmed. "That was beautiful," someone said. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Another asked Dot. She shook her head gently, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "I used to play when I was younger. That's all." She didn't want to share more. Not here. Not now. She stepped away from the piano, ready to return to her tasks. But as she walked back toward the counter, she heard more whispers. This time, they weren't talking down to her. The tone had changed completely. "She's incredible. I didn't expect that from her. Did you see her hands?" She played like she never stopped. Their voices followed her like a warm wind, both comforting and unsettling. She wasn't used to being praised. She didn't know how to accept it. She picked up a tray and forced herself back into her routine. Serving food, clearing plates, wiping tables, these were the parts of her day she understood. They were simple, steady, and predictable. Music, on the other hand, was something she had buried deep, something that carried too many memories. But now the door she had locked so tightly felt slightly open. As she walked past the tables, one customer stopped her. It was a woman who had been listening quietly during the performance. She wasn't loud or excited like the others. Her eyes held warmth. "I just wanted to say your music was touching," the woman said. "It felt honest." The waitress didn't know how to describe the feeling that stirred inside her. She nodded. "Thank you," she replied softly. The night continued with the same flow of orders and dishes, but everything felt different. People treated her with a little more care, a little more interest. The celebrating group asked her to join them for a moment, offering her cake and trying to talk to her about music. She declined politely and stayed focused on her duties. But she couldn't deny the small spark of warmth their kindness left in her. Still, she felt uneasy. She didn't want attention. She didn't want questions. She didn't want her past to rise again. Later that night, when the dinner rush slowed, she finally had a moment alone in the hallway near the storage room. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and let out a long breath. She hadn't expected to play. She hadn't expected anyone to react so deeply. She hadn't expected the music to come back as naturally as breathing. Her mind drifted back to her younger days. She remembered practicing late into the night, her fingers aching but her heart full. She remembered an old teacher telling her she had something rare, a gift that came from emotion, not skill alone. She remembered performing in front of small audiences, feeling the joy of connecting with people through sound. But she also remembered the moment everything changed, the moment life demanded she earn money instead of chasing dreams. Responsibilities had grown heavier than piano keys, and slowly, painfully, she had let the music fade. She opened her eyes again. She reminded herself that tonight was just one moment. One unexpected moment. Nothing more. When the restaurant was nearly empty, the owner approached her again. "Are you sure you don't play anymore?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I stopped a long time ago." I don't think I can play like I used to. He nodded slowly. Well, what you played tonight. It meant something to people. His simple words hung in the air. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. Double quotes, thank you, he added before walking away. As she cleaned the final table, she glanced over at the piano again. It looked less like an old decoration now, and more like something alive, something calling to her. She didn't approach it. She didn't even take a step toward it. But her eyes rested on it longer than usual. After closing time, she went home. Her small apartment was quiet, just like her life. She set down her bag, washed her face, and made tea. She tried to relax, but her mind kept replaying the moment her fingers touched the keys. Something inside her felt awake again. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They looked ordinary, just hands used for carrying plates and wiping tables. But tonight they had reminded her of who she once was. She whispered to herself, "Why did I play?" She wasn't sure if she was upset or grateful. The truth was, she had played because she didn't want to embarrass herself in front of others. But once she began, the music took over. It felt like meeting an old friend she had missed desperately, but didn't know how to face. The next day at work, people were still talking about her performance. Customers asked her questions. Some requested she play again. Others simply looked at her with newfound respect. The change was overwhelming. The owner asked if she would be willing to play a few minutes each weekend to attract more customers. She politely refused. The thought of performing again made her chest tighten. She didn't want to be pushed into something she wasn't ready for, but every time she passed the piano, she felt a pull. A soft tug at her chest that whispered, "You still belong here." She tried to ignore it. She kept herself busy, taking orders and moving from table to table. But the piano sat there quietly, almost patiently, as if waiting. Later that afternoon, when the restaurant was nearly empty, a young boy walked up to the piano and pressed a random key. The sound echoed through the room. "Don't touch that," his parents said quickly, pulling him away. But the single note stirred something inside the waitress again. She looked at the piano the same way someone might look at an old photograph, nostalgic, but afraid to touch. She didn't approach it that day, or the next. But she felt the music growing somewhere inside her. Memories came softly at first, like dust drifting in sunlight, then stronger. She found herself humming while sweeping the floor. She found her fingers tapping rhythms on the counter while waiting for orders. One night after closing, she lingered longer than usual. The owner had already gone home. The lights were dim. The restaurant was quiet. She stood near the piano, staring at it with hesitation. She reached out and touched the wooden frame with her fingertips. It felt familiar, too familiar. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just let herself breathe. Then she stepped back. She wasn't ready, not yet, but something had shifted. The door she kept closed wasn't locked anymore, and deep inside her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of something she had tried to forget, something that was slowly finding its way back into her life. She walked back to the small staff room with a heaviness she tried to hide. Even though the applause from the dining hall still echoed faintly in her ears, she did not let herself enjoy it. It wasn't applause meant for her. It was surprise, disbelief, maybe even curiosity. And she knew how quickly curiosity could turn into expectations, and how expectations could turn into pressure. She sat on the wooden bench near the cubbies where the staff kept their aprons. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She turned them over, palm up, and stared at them. These were the same hands she used to wipe tables, carry trays, and refill water glasses. These were also the same hands that once held onto the edges of a piano bench with excitement, many years ago, when the world still felt simple. But tonight, those hands had betrayed her hiding place. They had answered the piano like an old friend calling out. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt caught between shame and longing shame for being noticed. Longing for something she had tried hard to bury. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. One of the younger servers stepped in, holding a stack of menus. He paused when he saw her. "They're still talking about you out there," he said, not teasing, not mocking, just stating a fact. She forced a small smile. "They'll forget by tomorrow. People always do." He shrugged. "Maybe, but I don't think they will this time." She didn't respond. She just nodded and stood up so she could return to work. The night wasn't over, and she didn't want anyone accusing her of being distracted or slow. She tied her apron tighter around her waist, took a breath, and stepped back into the warm noise at the dining hall. Inside, the conversations felt louder. The clinking of forks and glasses seemed to follow her like a spotlight she didn't want. As she tried to blend into the rhythm of the room again, she overheard fragments, some kind, some curious, some careless. "Did you hear her play? Looks like she's been hiding something. Who taught her? She must have practiced her whole life." She walked faster, avoiding eye contact. She didn't want anyone asking questions. Questions led to memories, and memories were the very things she had kept locked away for years. For the rest of the shift, she worked with a focus so sharp it almost felt like punishment. She didn't let herself pause. She didn't let herself think. She moved from table to table like someone trying to outrun her own past. But when the last customers finally left, and the lights in the dining hall dimmed to their late-night glow, she felt the weight of everything return. The manager approached her as she wiped down a table. He was calm, thoughtful, the kind of person who rarely showed emotion, but always paid attention. Tonight, though, there was something different in his eyes. "You did something special today," he said quietly. She kept cleaning the table. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." It wasn't a scene. It was a moment. Moments matter. She straightened up and met his eyes reluctantly. "I just played a few notes. That's all." "You didn't play a few notes," he said. "You played like someone who carries music inside them, not just in their hands." She felt her breath stick for a moment. She didn't want anyone to see through her. Not now. Not when she had spent years building a quiet life, a safe one. He continued, "Some guests want to know more about you. But I told them you value your privacy. I hope that's all right." She nodded, her shoulders softening with relief. "Thank you. I don't want people thinking I'm more than I am. That's not for them to decide." There was a long pause before he added, "Look, I don't know what music meant to you before tonight, but I could see what it did to you. It woke something up, and maybe that isn't a bad thing." She didn't answer. She didn't know how. She just looked down at her hands again. When her shift ended, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet. Lamps glowed softly along the sidewalks. She walked slowly, each step carrying whispers of old memories that had suddenly found their way back into her mind. She walked past the corner where a small music shop used to stand. It had closed years ago, but she still remembered going there as a child, pressing her face against the glass, looking at the pianos inside with a kind of love she didn't yet know how to explain. She remembered the way her old teacher would tap the edge of the piano lightly to signal a mistake. She remembered the warm smell of wood polish, the sound of her own breathing as she practiced scales, the thrill of playing a piece correctly for the first time. She remembered her younger self, hopeful, excited. Sure, but she also remembered the disappointment, the reasons she quit, the responsibilities that grew heavier with time, pulling her away from the world of music she once lived in. She reached the small apartment she rented above a bakery. The hallway light flickered like it always did. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. It was quiet, neat, and ordinary. On a small shelf in the corner sat a tiny wooden music box she had kept for years. She had never wound it since moving into the apartment. Tonight, she did. A soft, familiar melody filled the room. Hesitant at first, then warm, like a voice returning after years of silence. She sat on the edge of her bed and let the tears come not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that carried both joy and sorrow. Why had she let go of music? Why had she convinced herself she no longer deserved it? She had pushed it away because life demanded practicality, because dreams didn't pay bills, because talent without opportunity felt painful. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt the truth settle inside her. It wasn't music she had been afraid of losing. It was herself. As the music box slowed to a stop, she wiped her face and took a deep breath. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know whether she would ever touch a piano again in front of people. But she knew one thing. Something had awakened, and she couldn't push it back anymore. She lay down, pulling the blanket over her. She closed her eyes and listened to the faint echo of the melody that still lingered in her mind. Before sleep finally pulled her under, she whispered to herself soft, unsure, but honest, maybe it's time to try again. The night held her gently, as if agreeing. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a spark she thought had died long ago began to glow once more. The next few days passed quietly, but the calm felt different now. It was not the soft, steady calm she was used to. It was the kind that hid questions, thoughts, and little sparks she didn't know how to put out. Every morning when she walked into the restaurant, she noticed the piano first, before anything else. It was as if the piano had grown brighter somehow, or maybe she had simply become more aware of it. She tried to keep her routine normal. She moved from table to table with her same polite smile, took orders, refilled glasses, and carried warm plates carefully. But her mind wandered more often than before. Sometimes she would catch herself pressing invisible piano keys on the counter or tapping rhythms on the trays. Whenever she realized it, she quickly pulled her hands back, almost embarrassed. Even though no one was watching, people were still talking about the night she played. Some customers who had not been there heard the story from friends and asked her about it. She always responded with short answers. She didn't want the attention, even though the praise was gentle and sincere. She didn't know how to handle kindness that was directed at something she had tried to bury. The owner brought up the idea of weekend performances again. He wasn't pushy. He asked softly, as if he didn't want to scare her away from the thought. But she gave him the same answer as before. She wasn't ready. She didn't know if she would ever be. Still, every time she said no, a thin wave of disappointment ran through her. She didn't understand why. Was she disappointed in herself? Or was she afraid of something she couldn't name? One afternoon, the restaurant was quieter than usual. Only a few customers were scattered around. A warm, slow breeze came through the windows. She was wiping down a table near the piano when a man from one of the booths spoke up. "Do you play often?" he asked, his voice soft and calm. She stopped wiping for a second. "No," she replied. "I played a long time ago." "Not anymore." He nodded thoughtfully. "I heard people talking about you. They said your music made the whole room still." She felt a small knot form in her stomach. "It was just a moment," she said. "I don't think much of it." The man smiled kindly. Sometimes moments are all it takes to wake something up. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded and walked away. But his words stayed with her longer than she expected. Later in the evening, when the sun began to set and the golden light filled the restaurant, she found herself standing near the piano again. She wasn't sure how she ended up there. She stood still, just long enough for the owner to notice. You know, he said from behind the counter, you can play it whenever you want, even when there's nobody here. She turned slightly. I don't think I should. He tilted his head. Why not? She searched for an answer. She couldn't explain the fear inside her. It wasn't fear of the piano. It was fear of what would happen if she let the music back into her life. I just don't know if I can, she whispered. He didn't push her. Only when you're ready. That night, after closing, she stayed behind again. She cleaned the tables slowly, giving herself reasons to stay longer. She swept the floor twice, even though it didn't need it. She checked the napkins, reorganized the menus, anything she could think of. She woke up early the next morning, long before the sun reached the windows of her small apartment. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the quiet around her. It felt different. There was a faint buzz under her skin, the kind that came from thinking too much or wanting something she wasn't yet ready to admit. She stretched her arms, sat up slowly, and looked around her room. Nothing had changed, yet something inside her had. She felt it in the way her heart beat a little faster, and in how her mind drifted back to the sound of the piano from the night before. She tried to shake the feeling off and prepare for the day, but her thoughts kept pulling her back. After getting dressed, she walked downstairs to the bakery. The owner greeted her with a warm smile and a tray of fresh bread. He always set one aside for her, and she always thanked him politely. Today, though, he looked at her with curious eyes. You seem brighter today, he said. She blinked. Do I? You look like someone who remembered something important. She laughed softly, unsure how to respond. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Maybe she had remembered something she had buried for too long. As she walked toward the restaurant for her morning shift, she felt a nervous flutter inside her chest. She could already imagine guests whispering, staff glancing at her, someone teasing her about becoming famous overnight. She didn't want attention. She wanted quiet. But she also couldn't forget the feeling of her fingers touching those piano keys. When she reached the restaurant, she slipped into the staff room and put on her apron. A few coworkers greeted her with smiles that lasted a second too long, like they were holding back questions. She tried to keep her expression neutral, not cold, just steady. One of the hosts walked up to her. Last night was something, he said. She nodded. It was just a moment. Nothing big. Maybe not to you, he replied, but people noticed. They're still talking about it. Her stomach tightened. That was the one thing she wasn't ready for. The dining hall was calm in the morning. Soft sunlight touched the tables, and the smell of brewed coffee filled the air. As she went from table to table preparing for the opening, she tried to focus on her tasks. Forks, napkins, glasses. Simple things. Things she could control, but every time she passed the corner where the piano stood, she felt her pulse quicken. It sat silently, just as it had for weeks, maybe months. It was just another decoration for most people, but now it felt like it was watching her. She avoided looking at it too long. The manager arrived, a few minutes before opening. He offered her a nod of acknowledgement, the kind that said he respected space, but still had something on his mind. Can we talk for a moment? He asked. Her shoulders tensed. She followed him to a quiet corner. I spoke with the owner this morning, he said. He heard about what happened last night. He was impressed. Really impressed. She didn't know what to say. Praise always felt heavy to her, not comforting. He had an idea, the manager continued. Nothing final. Just a thought. He wants to know if you'd consider playing again. Maybe once a week during the quieter hours. Her heart dropped. I'm not a performer. I never wanted that. It wouldn't be a show, he assured her gently. Just music. If you wanted to. You don't have to decide now. She shook her head. I'm not sure. I don't think I can. He didn't push. It's all right. Think about it. But she didn't want to think about it. Thinking brought back memories that made her chest feel tight, memories of the little girl she once was, the one who believed music was her future, and memories of the moment when everything changed. She tried to work through the morning, but she found herself caught between the present and the past. Every sound reminded her of something. The clink of cutlery felt like metronome ticks. The hum of conversations felt like the quiet notes before a performance. By noon, she excused herself for a short break and stepped outside. The air was warm, with a gentle breeze moving through the trees along the street. She sat on a bench and folded her hands in her lap. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She remembered her old piano teacher, a calm woman with a patient voice. She used to say, "Music doesn't leave you. Even if you walk away from it, it waits." Was that what this was? Music waiting for her? She sighed deeply. She wasn't sure she was ready to face that part of herself again. When her break ended, she returned inside. The day moved slowly, filled with small tasks and small conversations. She worked quietly, listening to customers laugh, talk, and enjoy their meals. And yet, every so often, someone would mention the piano. "Is that the young woman who played last night?" A customer whispered. "I hope she plays again," another said. She kept her head down. Later in the evening, when the restaurant grew busier, she felt the tension grow inside her. More people meant more chances for questions, more curious looks. She tried not to let it bother her, but she felt exposed. At one point, a family approached her. The father smiled kindly. "Were you the one who played the piano yesterday?" he asked. Her voice caught, but she managed to answer softly. "Yes, but it was only for a moment." The young daughter looked up at her with wide eyes. "It was beautiful," she whispered. Her heart softened. She hadn't expected that. "Thank you," she said gently. When the family left, she stood still for a few seconds, letting the words settle. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to her that way. It frightened her, but it also warmed something deep inside. After the last dinner rush settled, she found herself alone in the dining hall, straightening chairs and wiping tables. The piano sat in the corner, quietly waiting. She walked past it. Then she stopped. A part of her wanted to walk away, but another part wanted to sit down. She glanced around. No one was watching. No one was listening. Slowly, hesitantly, she approached the piano. Her fingertips brushed lightly against the keys. She didn't press them, not yet. She just let her hand rest there, remembering how it once felt to trust these keys, to let them speak for her. She sat down, her breath slow. She closed her eyes and let her fingers fall gently. This time, she didn't play a full melody. She didn't let herself go too far. She just played a few soft notes, barely louder than a whisper. But even those notes carried something inside them: fear, longing, and a quiet hope. When she opened her eyes, the manager was standing a few steps away. He didn't say anything. He just nodded as if he understood. She felt embarrassed, caught, but he raised his hand gently. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "But whatever you choose, it should be your choice, not fear's." She looked down at the keys again. Fear. Yes, that was the true barrier. Not work, not time. Fear of opening a door she had closed tightly. As she walked home that night, the sky was dark but calm. Stars peeked through the clouds like tiny reminders of quiet possibilities. She walked slowly, her thoughts heavy but clear. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was becoming certain. The music inside her wasn't gone. It was awakening. And she wasn't sure if she could silence it again. She woke before dawn, long before any sound touched the quiet streets outside her window. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling as if answers might appear there. Her mind felt heavy, but not in the way it once did. This weight was different. It carried possibility. She sat up slowly, rubbing her hands together as if warming them for something she wasn't sure she was ready for. The room was dim, but she could see the small music box on the shelf. She walked over to it and lifted the lid. The familiar tune played softly, filling the room with something that felt like memory and hope mixed together. She listened fully this time. No rushing. No hiding. When the melody faded, she closed the lid gently and whispered into the stillness. I think I know what I have to do. Her morning routine stayed the same. Wash her face, dress simply, tie her hair, walk downstairs for bread from the bakery, but her heart beat a little differently. The bakery owner noticed it right away. You seem steadier today, he said. She nodded softly. Maybe I am. The walk to the restaurant felt shorter than usual. The cool air touched her cheeks, and the sound of birds overhead made her pause for a second. She realized how long it had been since she noticed anything around her. Inside the restaurant, she slipped into her routine, setting tables, arranging napkins, greeting coworkers. But there was something calmer about her movements, something clear. When the manager walked in, he caught her eye right away. She gave him a nod, not a nervous one, not a hesitant one, a deciding one. He stepped closer. You've been thinking. Yes, she said quietly. And I think I want to try. I'm scared, but the fear doesn't feel as strong as it used to. He exhaled softly, relief gentle in his voice. You don't need to rush anything. Start small. Play when you want to. That's enough. She nodded. Maybe after closing tonight, when everyone's gone, just to see if I can do it without running away. He smiled. That sounds right. The day moved forward with its usual rhythm, customers arriving, orders being taken, dishes being served. But the piano in the corner felt different today. She no longer avoided looking at it. Instead, she glanced at it every now and then, like checking on a sleeping child. In the afternoon, a group of guests asked about her again. She answered politely, but briefly. She didn't shrink away like before. She just kept her voice gentle and calm. As evening settled in, the restaurant became warm with laughter, conversations, and the sound of plates being placed on tables. She worked smoothly, her mind half in the present and half somewhere else, not in the past, not in fear, but in anticipation. When the last customers finally left, she began her end-of-shift tasks. Clearing tables, wiping down surfaces, turning chairs upside down on top of the tables, and the dining hall became still. The manager lingered by the doorway, but didn't approach her. He simply stayed nearby, in case she needed the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. She walked slowly to the piano. It wasn't grand or fancy. It had small scratches, a few worn keys, and a soft, dusty smell. But to her, it felt like something old, familiar, and forgiving. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. Her breath wavered for a moment. Fears tugging at her, but she let them pass. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest. Then she played. She didn't choose a difficult piece. She didn't choose something to impress anyone. She chose the melody she remembered from childhood, the one she played when she first fell in love with music. A gentle tune about longing, about hope, about finding home. The notes were soft at first, almost trembling. But as she continued, they grew warmer, fuller. Something inside her loosened. She wasn't performing. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply speaking in the language she had forgotten she knew. When the last note faded, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer. Her eyes blurred with quiet tears, not of sadness, but of relief. She finally looked up. The manager stood near the edge of the room, his expression calm, respectful. That sounded like yourself, he said. She breathed out slowly. It felt like myself. He stepped closer, but didn't crowd her. Do you want to play next week? When it's quieter? No pressure. Just music. She thought for a moment, then nodded gently. Yes, I think I'd like that. That night, as she walked home, the moon hung low over the rooftops. The streets were empty but peaceful. She felt lighter with every step. When she reached her apartment, she sat on her bed, still wearing her apron, and let the calm wash over her. She looked at her hands again, the same hands she'd doubted, the same hands she'd hidden. This time, she saw strength in them. The next few days passed quietly. Guests continued to ask about her, some curious, some admiring, but she didn't let their questions control her anymore. She smiled politely, kept her answers short, and carried on. When the evening of her planned playing arrived, she felt nervous again, but it was the kind of nervous that meant something mattered. Not the kind that meant she was running away. A few regular customers gathered nearby, not expecting a show, just enjoying their meals. She sat at the piano with slow, steady breaths. She played. The room softened. Conversations slowed. People listened without expecting anything grand. They simply heard her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years belonging. After she finished, a small round of gentle applause rose from the tables. Not loud, not overwhelming, just kind. She nodded gratefully and stepped away. The manager approached her after her shift. You brought something peaceful into this place, he said. She smiled softly. I think I found something peaceful inside myself, too. From that day on, she played once a week. Not for attention, not for praise. For herself, the whispers stopped being whispers. They became warm comments, soft admiration, quiet encouragement. She didn't fear them anymore. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past tried to drag her down, but now she knew she could lift herself again. Music didn't take her away from her life. It became part of it again. One night, months later, as she finished her weekly piece, a young girl approached her wide-eyed, shy, holding a notebook. I want to learn, the girl whispered. Like you. She felt something warm bloom inside her chest. She knelt gently. Start small, she said. Start with the sounds you love. That's enough. The girl nodded, clutching the notebook to her heart. As she watched the girl walk back to her family, she realized something she had never let herself believe before. Her music mattered. Not because it was perfect, not because it was impressive, but because it was honest. She had lived in silence for many years, afraid her voice didn't deserve to be heard. Now, she knew better. Sometimes all a person needs is a single moment, a moment when they stop running, sit down, and let themselves be seen. For her, that moment had started with trembling hands on piano keys, and it continued with every note she played. Afterward, she stepped outside into the night air and took a slow breath. This was not the life she once imagined, but it was real. It was hers, and she was finally ready to live it. She walked home with a quiet smile, the kind that grows slowly from the center of a person's chest. Tonight, the world felt a little lighter, and so did she.